The deep vacuum silence of the KX-7 asteroid belt was broken only by the occasional ping of metal expanding against the cold, the hiss of environmental systems, and the labored breathing of men who had long ago resigned themselves to living on the edge of death. The mining station Last Chance hung in the void like a mechanical parasite attached to a cluster of barren rocks, a jumble of prefabricated modules, improvised repairs, and retrofitted equipment that somehow continued to function despite all logical reasons it should have failed years ago. Jacob Reynolds stood at the viewport in the command module, his calloused fingers tracing a series of calculations on a worn datapad. At 47, his face carried the hard lines of a man who had seen too much of humanity's worst impulses. The faded Republic Armed Forces tattoo on his forearm, partially burned away during his dishonorable discharge, marked him as one of countless veterans who had discovered their loyalty to the People's Republic of Free Worlds had never been reciprocated. "We're burning through oxygen faster than expected," Steve Martinez reported from the environmental station. "Filter systems degrading again." His voice carried the flat effect of a man stating an inconvenience rather than a potential death sentence. Jacob didn't look up from his calculations. "We'll make the supply run to Callisto Station a day early. The oxygen will hold." "And if the customs officials decide to hold us for inspection again?" asked Talon Beer, the station's technical advisor, whose wire-rimmed glasses and precise diction betrayed his academic past. Before becoming a thought criminal purged from the Republic Science Academy, he had been developing more efficient Nippium propulsion systems. "Then we'll all have a nice long nap," Jacob replied with the dark humor that passed for optimism in the outer belts. "But the Republic's been busy with the Centauri protests. Their patrol patterns have been lighter out here." The 12 men who comprised the crew of Last Chance had formed an unlikely brotherhood. Each had his reasons for choosing the dangerous freedom of independent mining over the suffocating security of Republic employment. For some, like Jacob and Talon, there had been no choice at all. The Republic had marked them as undesirables, suitable only for the labor camps or public rehabilitation. Others, like Mike Wilson, the oldest at 63 with permanently stooped shoulders from 30 years of mining, had simply grown weary of watching freedoms disappear with each new emergency decree. The rest of the crew was scattered throughout the station. Josh Taylor and Doug Williams were maintaining the life support systems. Brian Thomas and Kevin Anderson were handling the refinery module. Ryan Davis and Greg Miller were preparing the mining drones. Scott Jones and Chris Smith were checking the integrity of the station's outer hull, and Mark Brown was monitoring communications, alert for any sign of Republic patrols. Their mining operation was modest but persistent. By focusing on asteroids considered too small for efficient Republic exploitation, they managed to extract enough standard Nippium to maintain their independence, living perpetually on the brink of financial ruin, but free from the daily humiliations of life under the Republic's watchful eyes. Drone Beta 7 is reporting some unusual density readings from the north quadrant of AS-249. Ryan's voice crackled over the comm system. "Could be equipment malfunction, but the pattern's consistent." Jacob raised an eyebrow. AS-249 was an unremarkable asteroid they had been planning to mine for basic materials, mostly iron and nickel with traces of standard Nippium. "Worth taking a closer look?" Talon adjusted his glasses, studying the sensor data Ryan had forwarded. "The density patterns are peculiar. If I didn't know better, I'd say there's a cavity inside." "Natural cavities don't form in asteroids this size," Mike grumbled as he joined them in the command module, his voice raspy from years of exposure to mining particulates, despite respirator protocols. "Exactly," Talon replied, his eyes brightening with scientific curiosity. "A dangerous trait in the Republic, where questioning established knowledge could be classified as socially disruptive." Jacques made the decision quickly. "Ryan, recall the other drones. Let's focus on AS-24999. If there's something unusual, I want to know what we're dealing with before we commit to a full extraction." The sudden shift in priorities was nothing new to the crew. Survival in the belt required adaptability. Within an hour, 3 of their 5 operational drones were positioned around the asteroid, conducting detailed scans while the men gathered in the command module to assess the findings. "It's definitely hollow," Greg confirmed, manipulating the holographic display to show a 3-dimensional rendering of the asteroid's interior. "And there's something else, an unusual concentration of heavy elements at the center of the cavity." Talon leaned forward, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. "These readings, they can't be right." He adjusted parameters, ran calibration tests, and shook his head. "If these are accurate, what we're seeing is—" "Speak plainly, Talon," Jacob said, recognizing the scientist's hesitation, a habit formed from years of having revolutionary ideas suppressed. "Nippium heavy, in concentrations I've never seen documented. Not even in theoretical models." The room fell silent. Standard nippium was valuable enough, powering everything from domestic hover vehicles to interstellar freighters, but nippium heavy, the denser, more energy-rich isotope, was the cornerstone of military applications, from weapons systems to battleship cores. Its bronze-colored viscous form was so rare that most miners went their entire careers without encountering more than trace amounts. Mike was the first to break the silence with a low whistle. "How much are we talking about?" Talon's fingers trembled slightly as he calculated. "Based on these readings, enough to power the entire Republic fleet for 20 years. Maybe more. Republic regulations require immediate reporting of strategic resources," Brian said automatically, then grimaced at his own words. The involuntary regurgitation of propaganda showing how deeply Republic conditioning penetrated even among those who had escaped. Jacob's expression hardened. "We all know what the regulations say. The question is whether we follow them." The implications hung heavy in the recycled air. Republic law mandated reporting such fines with penalties for non-compliance ranging from permanent citizenship revocation to summary execution, depending on the resource's strategic value. But compensation for such discoveries was notoriously minimal, usually amounting to nothing more than having one's existing debts to the Republic generously forgiven. "We could try selling it quietly," Kevin suggested, lowering his voice despite the absence of Republic monitoring devices. "There are buyers in the free systems who would pay, and how exactly would we move that much nippium heavy without being noticed?" Chris interrupted. "One shipment, maybe, but this much? The Republic would track us down before we completed a second run?" Talon nodded grimly. "Chris is right. The energy signatures alone would alert any patrol within half a light year." Jacob paced the small command deck, feeling the weight of the decision. His thoughts turned to his brother Samuel, once his closest ally, now a commander in the Republic security forces. Their paths had diverged 15 years ago when Samuel had chosen advancement within the system over the principles their parents had died defending. "We report it," Jacob finally said, meeting the surprised gazes of his crew, "but not because of regulations, because it's too big to hide, and I'd rather have us on record as the discoverers before someone else stumbles across it." "You think the Republic will actually honor finders' rights?" Scott scoffed. Jacob's smile held no humor. "No, but I'm counting on their bureaucratic process to buy us time to make contingency plans." The debate continued for hours. Some, like Mike, argued that any interaction with the Republic would end badly. Others, like Talon, suggested that the find's scientific significance might afford them special treatment. In the end, Jacob's approach prevailed. They would follow official channels while quietly preparing for the Republic's inevitable betrayal. The next 3 days were a flurry of activity. They deployed specialized drones to verify the cavity's contents, collecting samples that confirmed Talon's assessment. The Nippium heavy existed in an almost perfect natural reservoir, a geological anomaly that had concentrated the isotope in its purest form. Jacob authorized Talon to prepare the official discovery report with extensive scientific documentation. Meanwhile, he used his old military connections to send encrypted messages to contacts in the free territories. people who might provide sanctuary if the situation deteriorated. Mark, monitoring communications, confirmed the transmission of their official report to the Republic Ministry of Resources. Report acknowledged, they're processing it through channels. His expression was grim. Also picked up increased comm traffic in the sector, military frequencies. How soon? Jacob asked, already knowing the answer. 3 days, maybe 4 if we're lucky. On the night before the expected Republic response, the miners gathered in the station's small recreation area. The mood was a strange mixture of celebration and dread. They had discovered a fortune beyond imagination, but none harbored illusions about their chances of benefiting from it. Chris had broken out the last bottles of contraband whiskey, real Earth whiskey, not the synthetic swill provided in Republic rations. To the biggest find in KX-7 history, he toasted, passing the bottles around. The men drank deeply, exchanging stories of what they would do with the wealth if, against all odds, the Republic honored their claim. Brian spoke of buying a small farm on one of the agricultural colonies. Ryan dreamed of reuniting with the family he hadn't seen since his political reassignment. Kevin simply wanted enough credits to erase his identity from the Republic's databases. A fresh start beyond their reach. Jacob watched his crew with a mixture of pride and sorrow. These men were the finest he'd known, each carrying private wounds inflicted by the Republic, yet retaining their humanity in a system designed to crush individuality. Mike, who had remained silent throughout the festivities, finally spoke. His weathered face was solemn in the dim light. "I've seen Republic gratitude before," he said quietly. "When we found those palladium deposits in the Jovian moons, Republic came in, thanked us for our service to the collective, then shipped half my crew to labor camps for resource security." He took another swallow of whiskey. "The Republic doesn't share treasures, it only takes them." Jacob nodded, acknowledging the truth in the old miner's words. "Get some rest," he told the crew. "Talanoro, we find out if we're rich men or fugitives." As the others drifted off to their quarters, Jacob remained alone in the command module. He activated a small device hidden beneath his console, a military-grade encryptor acquired through channels best left unmentioned. His message was brief. "Contingency Alpha, package location transmitted, Republic response imminent. Remember your promise." The response came almost immediately. "Confirmed. Assets in position. The sun still rises in the east." The old resistance code phrase brought a faint smile to Jacob's lips. He shut down the communicator and gazed out at the stars, pinpricks of light in the endless void. Freedom still existed out there, in the spaces between Republic control. The question was whether he and his men would live to reach it. In his quarters, Jacob reviewed their escape plan one final time. The maintenance shuttle had been prepared, its transponder modified to broadcast incorrect identification codes. Emergency supplies were staged for rapid loading. 5 of his most trusted men were briefed on the rendezvous coordinates. Jacob had no illusions about what would happen when the Republic arrived. His brother would almost certainly be commanding the operation. Samuel had always been assigned to handle family problems. The Republic understood the psychological value of forcing relatives to betray one another. As he lay on his narrow bunk, Jacob's thoughts drifted to their discovery. The Nippium heavy represented power, not just the physical energy it contained, but political power. Whoever controlled it could project military force throughout the sector. The Republic would never allow such power to remain in private hands. Jacob didn't fear death. He had faced it too many times. During the border wars, during his escape from the rehabilitation center, during countless mining accidents. What he feared was submission, the slow erosion of will that the Republic system was designed to produce, the transformation of individuals into cooperative parts of the collective machine. The Nippium Heavy had changed everything. Before, they had been irrelevant to the Republic's grand designs, minor irritants operating in the margins. Now they represented a threat simply by knowing what existed in that asteroid. "Control the resources, control the people," Jacob murmured, recalling his father's words before the secret police had taken him away for attitude adjustment. His father had never returned. The ping of an incoming communication broke his reverie. The message was brief. Republic battlecruiser, collective will, detected entering sector. Estimated arrival 16 hours. Jacob closed his eyes, mentally preparing for what was to come. The countdown had begun. The Republic battlecruiser Collective Will emerged from hyperspace like a predator. 1,600 meters of gleaming metal and weaponry. Its hull emblazoned with the Republic symbol, a stylized galaxy clasped in a fist. 5 escort vessels flanked it in perfect formation, their automated defense systems already scanning for threats despite the absence of any military presence in the sector. Jacob watched from the command module viewport, his expression betraying nothing as the massive ships approached. Behind him, the crew maintained a tense silence, each man focusing on his assigned task with mechanical precision, a defense mechanism against the fear that threatened to paralyze them. "They're hailing us," Mark announced from the communications console, his voice carefully neutral. Jacob nodded once. "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the face Jacob had both expected and dreaded. Commander Samuel Freshman stood rigidly in his immaculate black uniform, the silver insignia of the Republic Security Forces gleaming on his collar. At 45, Samuel was 2 years younger than Jacob, but authority had aged him differently, hardening his features into a mask of cold efficiency rather than weathering them with experience. "Mining Station KX-7, this is Commander Samuel Freshman of the People's Republic Security Forces. You will power down all systems except life support and prepare for boarding. Any deviation from these instructions will be considered hostile action and responded to accordingly." No greeting, no acknowledgement of their shared blood. Samuel's eyes met Jacob's through the video feed, revealing nothing beyond professional detachment. "This is Station Manager Jacob Reynolds," Jacob replied, matching his brother's formal tone. "We're a registered independent operation with all permits in order. May I ask the purpose of this inspection?" Samuel's expression didn't change. "This is not an inspection. The Ministry of Resources has designated asteroid AS-249 and all materials within as priority strategic assets. Your cooperation in this transition of authority is appreciated." The euphemisms were typical Republic doublespeak. Transition of authority meant seizure. Cooperation is appreciated meant resistance would be met with lethal force. Jacob nodded slowly. "Understood, Commander. We'll comply with boarding procedures." He terminated the connection before Samuel could respond, then turned to his crew. "You all know what's coming? Anyone who wants out, now's the time. Take Emergency Pod 3. It's prepped with civilian identifiers. The rest of us will keep them occupied." No one moved. These men had faced Republic procedures before. "They'll separate us for questioning," Talon said quietly, removing his glasses and carefully placing them in a protective case. "Standard protocol for resource seizures." "And they'll be looking for the samples," Ryan added. "The ones we extracted for analysis." Jacob's plan had accounted for this. The samples were ejected 2 hours ago. Drone Theta 4 deposited them at the secondary location. What he didn't say, what didn't need saying, was that those samples might be their only leverage if they survived the next few hours. "Docking procedure initiated," Mark reported as the first vibrations ran through the station. "Their Marines are attaching to airlock 2. Jacob squared his shoulders. "Remember, we're surprised but cooperative. We believed our Discover report would receive standard processing. We expected finder's fees, not military intervention." The crew nodded grimly. The lie was transparent. No one who had lived under Republic rule for more than a decade would expect fair treatment, but maintaining the pretense might keep them alive long enough to execute their escape. The station shuddered as magnetic clamps secured the Republic vessels. External cameras showed armored Marines deploying from multiple airlocks, their standard-issue RX-70 pulse rifles at the ready. 120 combat personnel, Mike observed with professional detachment. 16 officers. Standard seizure protocol would call for 30. They're expecting resistance. Jacob's jaw tightened. or they're sending a message. The first Marines reached the station's main airlock. The hiss of pressurization was followed by the metallic thunk of the inner door releasing. Jacob stepped forward to meet them, his posture deliberately non-threatening. 4 Marines entered first, their faceplates reflecting Jacob's image as their weapons tracked every movement. Behind them came a Republic official in the gray uniform of the Ministry of Resources, followed by Samuel himself. "Station Manager Reynolds," Samuel said, his voice filtered through his helmet speaker. "You and your crew will assemble in your mess hall for processing. Ministry Adjutant Phillips will explain the situation." Phillips stepped forward, a thin man with the perpetual frown of a bureaucrat who enjoyed wielding power through paperwork. By special decree of the Central Committee, asteroid AS-2429 has been reclassified as Republic Critical Infrastructure. All extraction rights are hereby transferred to the Ministry of Resources, effective immediately. Jacob forced himself to appear merely confused rather than outraged. "We filed our discovery report through proper channels. Under Section 27 of the Mining Code, independent operators are entitled to—" "The committee has suspended Section 27 for this operation," Phillips interrupted, his tone suggesting the matter was too trivial to debate. "The resource in question is too valuable for private management." 2 more squads of Marines had entered the station during this exchange, fanning out to secure key areas. Jacob noted their movements peripherally. Professional, efficient, but not yet triggering the hidden countermeasures he had installed throughout the station. "My men need to collect personal effects," Jacob said. Samuel shook his head. "All personal items will be inspected and cleared before release. Security protocol." "Then at least allow them to shut down equipment properly," Jacob pressed. "Some of these systems can't be abruptly terminated without damage." A flicker of professional respect crossed Samuel's face, one technician acknowledging another's concern. "You have 30 minutes for proper shutdown procedures. Supervised." It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Jacob nodded to his crew, who dispersed to their stations, each accompanied by armed Marines. The practiced movements of equipment shutdown would provide cover for the subtle activation of their contingency protocols. In the refinery module, Kevin's fingers moved across control panels, initiating shutdown sequences while simultaneously embedding command overrides in the system. In the environmental control room, Steve was doing the same, ensuring that when the time came, atmospherics could be manipulated remotely. Jacob found himself escorted by Samuel personally as he moved toward the primary system's core. The brothers walked in silence through the narrow corridors, surrounded by the hums and clicks of the aging station. "Your report was quite thorough," Samuel finally said, his voice low enough that only Jacob could hear. "Especially the geological anomaly that created the deposit. Fascinating reading. Talon deserves the credit. He has a gift for analysis." Samuel nodded. "The former Professor Beer, I recognized his methodology." He paused. "His theories on Nippium isotope stability were correct, apparently. The Academy lost a brilliant mind when he was reassigned." The euphemism for Talon's political persecution hung between them. Reassigned meant scheduled for neurological adjustment before being sent to a labor camp. That Talon had escaped this fate remained a sore point for the Republic. "Why are you handling this personally?" Jacob asked as they reached the core control room. "Surely a mining station seizure is beneath a commander's dignity." Samuel's expression remained neutral. "The committee takes this discovery very seriously. Initial analysis suggests it could shift the balance of power in 3 sectors. Jacob began the shutdown sequence for the station's main reactor, his movements deliberate and unhurried despite the Marines' rifles trained on his back. "And the men who found it, what happens to them?" "They'll be processed according to protocol," Samuel replied. "Those with specialized skills will be assigned to appropriate work details, and those without—" Samuel didn't answer, which was answer enough. When the shutdown procedures were complete, the Marines herded the entire crew into the mess hall, the only space large enough to contain them all. The room, normally a place of crude jokes and rare moments of relaxation, had been transformed into a processing center. Tables were pushed against walls, and scanning equipment had been set up at one end. Philip stood before them, flanked by armed guards. Samuel remained by the door, observing but not participating in what was to come. "Your cooperation has been noted," Phillips began, consulting his datapad. "The Republic recognizes your service in identifying this valuable resource. As compensation, all outstanding debts to the Republic have been forgiven, and your citizenship status has been reinstated to Category C." Mike gave a bitter laugh. "Category C? That barely allows transit between work assignments." Phillips ignored him. "You will now be processed for reassignment. Those with technical skills valuable to the Nippium extraction operation may be permitted to remain in this sector under supervision." Talon stepped forward, his scientific curiosity apparently overriding caution. "I'd like to request assignment to the research division. My background in isotope stability could—" "Assignments are determined by the Ministry of Labor, not personal preference," Phillips cut him off. "The Republic places citizens where they best serve the collective." Jacob watched the proceedings with calculated patience. The scanner they were using was standard Republic issue. It would detect any conventional weapons or communication devices, but not the specialized equipment hidden throughout the station. The timing had to be perfect. "When can we return to work?" Mike asked, his voice carrying the wariness of a man who had seen this scenario play out before. "Some of us have been mining these belts for decades. We know them better than any Republic survey team." Philip's thin smile held no warmth. "The Republic thanks you for your service to the collective good. Your experience will be evaluated during processing." "That's not an answer," said Billy Boatman, the youngest of the crew at 26. Despite his American name, his parents had emigrated from the Eastern Coalition before it was absorbed into the Republic. Billy's technical brilliance with drone systems had earned him a place on the crew despite his youth. Section 42 of the Labor Code guarantees finders' rights even during strategic appropriations. We're entitled to at least supervisory positions. The mess hall fell silent. Citing Republic law to Republic officials was always dangerous. It implied the system might be bound by its own rules rather than the whims of those in power. Philip's face hardened. He looked to Samuel, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "The Ministry has determined this resource is too valuable for private operation," Philip stated flatly. Then he nodded to the sergeant standing beside him. The sergeant raised his rifle in one fluid motion and fired. The pulse blast caught Billy in the chest, throwing him backward. He was dead before he hit the floor, his features frozen in an expression of shocked disbelief. "Any further questions regarding your reassignments?" Phillips asked, his tone unchanged, as if he were inquiring about meal preferences rather than standing over a murdered man. The crew stared in horrified silence. Even for the Republic, such casual execution was unexpected outside formal detention centers. Jacob locked eyes with Samuel across the room. His brother's expression revealed nothing, but Jacob knew him well enough to recognize the subtle tension in his posture. This hadn't been planned, at least not by Samuel. The order had come from higher up: make an example, establish absolute control from the beginning. "Process them individually," Samuel ordered, breaking the silence. "Start with technical personnel. I want this station fully operational under Republic control within 12 hours. The processing began methodically. Each man was scanned, questioned about his skills, and assigned a preliminary labor category. Those with engineering or mining expertise were segregated for extended assessment, Republic terminology for more intensive interrogation regarding the station's operations and the Nippium deposit. Jacob was processed last, as befitted the station manager. The scanner operator frowned at his readings, showing evidence of military-grade bone welds and organ replacements, veteran status not indicated in his file. Phillips consulted his datapad. Reynolds, Jacob, former Republic Armed Forces, discharged following the Centauri incident. Citizenship downgraded to Category F, restricted from military or strategic industry employment. He looked up. Interesting that such an individual managed to obtain independent operator licensing. Administrative oversight, Jacob replied evenly. I'm sure someone will be severely reprimanded for allowing it. Philip's eyes narrowed at the veiled sarcasm. Your technical knowledge of this station makes you temporarily valuable, Reynolds. Don't test the limits of that value. Jacob was escorted to a storage compartment that had been converted into a holding cell. Talon, Ryan, and Steve were already there, sitting on storage containers that served as makeshift benches. A single Marine stood guard outside the sealed door. Where are the others? Jacob asked quietly after the door closed behind him. Separate holding areas, Talon replied, his voice barely above a whisper. They're isolating those with technical knowledge from the general labor. Jacob nodded slightly. The Republic was following standard procedure. Divide the crew, extract all useful information before reassignment. It was also playing into their escape plan. They killed Billy, Ryan said, still in shock. Just executed him for citing the labor code. They're establishing dominance, Jacob explained, making sure everyone understands this isn't a standard resource transfer. The rules have changed. Steve leaned closer. Time frame? The question contained multiple layers. How long until their opportunity? How long until they were separated permanently? How long until the Republic realized what they had done during the shutdown procedures? Shift change, Jacob murmured. They'll be rotating Marines after the initial securing operation. Standard procedure calls for a 20-hour initial deployment followed by 8-hour rotation cycles. Talon nodded almost imperceptibly. They had approximately 15 hours before their window opened. The hours passed with excruciating slowness. Periodically, one of them would be removed for additional questioning regarding the station's systems or the Nippium deposit. Each returned looking more exhausted than before, but none showed signs of physical abuse. The Republic preferred psychological pressure during initial interrogations, saving more direct methods for resistant subjects. Jacob was questioned 3 times. Once by Phillips regarding the station's operations, once by a mining engineer about the asteroid's composition, and finally by Samuel himself about the discovery process. His brother's questions were precise and professional, focused on technical details rather than personal history. As Samuel concluded the interview, he hesitated, then said quietly, "The Republic rewards valuable service, Jacob. Cooperation now could improve your situation considerably." Jacob met his brother's gaze. "Like it improved yours?" A muscle tightened in Samuel's jaw, the first genuine emotion he had displayed. "I serve the greater good. The Republic brings order to chaos." "Is that what happened to Billy? Order?" Samuel's expression closed again. "The sergeant exceeded protocol. He has been disciplined, not charged with murder." "There are no murders in the Republic, only necessary and unnecessary deaths." The committee determined his action was necessary if premature. Samuel gathered his notes. "You'll be transferred to the cruiser tomorrow for further assessment. Your technical knowledge of asteroid mining could be useful to the Republic." Jacob understood the subtext. Samuel was offering him a path back into the system, not freedom, but better conditions than most reassigned citizens could expect. The price was full cooperation. "I'll consider my options," Jacob replied neutrally. When he was returned to the holding cell, night cycle had begun on the station. The lighting had dimmed automatically, one of the many systems the Republic technicians hadn't yet reconfigured to their protocols. Jacob exchanged quick glances with his cellmates. The reduced lighting was part of their plan, creating shadows that would mask their movements when the time came. As the hours passed, subtle changes occurred throughout the station. Environmental systems adjusted temperature gradients by fractions of degrees. Maintenance drones performed routine diagnostic cycles. Power fluctuations, minor enough to be attributed to the aging infrastructure, rippled through non-essential systems. Individually, none of these changes would trigger security alerts. Collectively, they were preparing the station for what was to come. Shortly after what would have been midnight in their usual schedule, Jacob heard the sound they had been waiting for, the heavy footsteps of Marine squads rotating positions, the murmur of situation reports being exchanged. Shift change had begun. He removed a small device from the sole of his boot, a neural interrupter disguised as an insulation component. The Republic scanners hadn't detected it because it wasn't technically a weapon until assembled. Talon, Ryan, and Steve did the same, retrieving components hidden in their clothing and equipment. 60 seconds, Jacob whispered, assembling the device with practiced efficiency. The others nodded, positioning themselves near the door. The neural interrupter would temporarily incapacitate the guard without setting off armor alarms, if they timed it correctly. The subtle hiss of the environmental system increased slightly as oxygen levels were automatically adjusted throughout the station, another pre-programmed element of their escape plan. The increased oxygen would be barely noticeable to humans, but would affect the sensitivity of automated security sensors. Jacob held up his hand, counting down from 5 with his fingers. When he closed his fist, Talon triggered the device. A nearly inaudible pulse emanated from the mechanism. Outside the door, they heard the soft thud of the guard collapsing. Ryan quickly retrieved a hidden panel interface from beneath a storage container and connected it to the door's control system. His fingers flew across the small keypad, bypassing the security lockout. The door slid open, revealing the unconscious Marine. Steve quickly dragged him inside while Jacob retrieved the man's sidearm and communication device. "We have 4 minutes before the security system registers the missing guard," Jacob said, checking the corridor. "Maintenance shaft C to the auxiliary hangar. Move." They moved swiftly through the dimly lit corridors, avoiding the main passages where Republic personnel would be concentrated. The maintenance shafts, narrow utility tunnels that ran throughout the station, would be their highway to freedom. At a junction, Ryan paused, consulting a small display on his wrist. "Greg and Kevin are at Extraction Point 2. Chris and Scott report Republic personnel in their sector attempting alternative route." Jacob nodded grimly. They had anticipated that not all of the crew would make the rendezvous. "Proceed to the hangar. We'll hold as long as possible." The auxiliary hangar housed the station's maintenance shuttle, an ungainly but reliable craft designed for short-range repair operations. Unlike the primary shuttles, it hadn't been completely secured by Republic forces, who considered it too limited for escape attempts. They reached the access hatch to the hangar without incident. Jacob peered through the small viewport, counting Republic personnel. 2 technicians, 1 guard. The technicians are inventorying equipment, not watching the shuttle. Talon produced another neural interrupter. "Range is limited. We'll need to get within 5 meters. Jacob considered their options. "Ryan, environmental controls." Ryan nodded, accessing a nearby maintenance panel. His modifications during the shutdown had included installing remote overrides for key systems. With a few commands, he triggered an atmospheric pressure warning in an adjacent section, complete with alarm indicators. The guard reacted immediately, moving toward the warning panel near the hangar entrance. The technicians continued their inventory, more annoyed than concerned by the alarm. "Now," Jacob whispered as the guard moved within range. Talon activated the interrupter. The guard stiffened, then collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. The technicians turned at the sound, but Jacob was already moving, the appropriated sidearm raised. "Don't move," he ordered. "Hands where I can see them." The technicians froze, lifting their hands slowly. Their expressions showed more resignation than fear. As Republic citizens, they had been trained to respond to authority, regardless of who wielded it. "Secure them," Jacob directed Steve, who quickly bound the technicians with cable ties from a nearby toolkit. "No sign of Greg or Kevin," Ryan reported tensely, watching the hangar entrance. "And still no word from Chris or Scott." Jacob made the difficult decision. "We've hit our window. We need to move now or lose our chance entirely." The maintenance shuttle was designed for a crew of 3 but could accommodate 8 in emergency conditions. Jacob hoped they wouldn't need all that capacity and feared they might not. As they prepared the shuttle for launch, the hangar door slid open. Jacob raised his weapon, then lowered it as Greg and Kevin rushed in, followed by Mike. Their expressions told of narrow escapes and close calls. "Chris and Scott?" Jacob asked, already knowing the answer from their grim faces. Intercepted near the primary environmental control, Greg reported, breathing heavily. Republic forces were waiting, almost like they knew. Jacob's suspicions crystallized. Someone had anticipated their escape route, someone who knew how they thought. Samuel. What about Mark and Brian? Talon asked. Mike shook his head, separated for intensive questioning, couldn't reach them. 7 out of 12. Not what Jacob had hoped for, but better than he had feared. Board now. We're leaving. As the crew secured themselves in the shuttle, Jacob initialized the launch sequence. The shuttle's systems came online sluggishly, a deliberate modification they had made months ago to make the craft appear less functional than it actually was. Republic security protocols required hangar doors to remain locked during alert conditions, but Ryan's earlier manipulations of the environmental systems had created a cascade of minor alerts throughout the station. In the resulting confusion, the automated hangar systems continued to function on standard protocols rather than emergency lockdown. Exterior doors opening, Talon confirmed from the co-pilot's seat. We have a clear path. The shuttle's engines hummed to life as Jacob guided it toward the opening doors. Freedom lay just beyond. If they could clear the station before Republic forces realized what was happening. They were halfway to the doors when alarms blared throughout the hangar. Emergency lights flashed as the doors began to close again. Override rejected, Ryan reported frantically from the engineering station. They've locked us out of the system. Jacob pushed the engines to maximum thrust. The shuttle lurched forward, accelerating toward the narrowing gap. Metal screamed against metal as the craft scraped through the partially closed doors, leaving a trail of sparks in their wake. Then they were out, emerging into the vast darkness of space. The station receded behind them, its silhouette marred by the approaching forms of Republic patrol vessels. They're launching interceptors, Kevin reported, monitoring the scanner. Jacob had anticipated this, initiating countermeasures. The shuttle released a cloud of metallic chaff, another modification not listed in any official registry. The chaff would disrupt targeting systems long enough for them to reach the asteroid field, where the larger Republic vessels would have difficulty following. Set course for coordinates Alpha 7, Jacob instructed. Maximum burn for 60 seconds, then go dark. The shuttle shot forward, straining against its design limitations. Behind them, the interceptors gave chase, their superior engines rapidly closing the distance. They're within weapons range, Kevin warned. Jacob nodded grimly. Brace for evasive maneuvers. He threw the shuttle into a series of sharp turns, movements the craft had never been designed to execute. Warning lights flashed across the control panel as structural integrity alarms activated. The first pulse blast passed just overhead, illuminating the cockpit with a flash of blue energy. The second struck their port stabilizer, sending the shuttle into a spin that Jacob fought to control. Stabilizer at 40%, Talon reported tensely. One more direct hit and we're done. The asteroid field loomed ahead, a maze of tumbling rocks that promised either sanctuary or destruction. Jacob guided the damaged shuttle toward the densest cluster, threading between massive boulders that dwarfed their craft. Cut engines, he ordered as they penetrated the field. Switch to maneuvering thrusters only. The sudden silence as the main engines died was almost as jarring as the alarms had been. The shuttle drifted between asteroids, visible only to the most sensitive scanning equipment, which would be hampered by the mineral content of the surrounding rocks. Interceptors are holding position at the edge of the field, Ryan reported. They're not pursuing. Jacob allowed himself a moment of relief. Republic pilots were trained to avoid unnecessary risks, especially with valuable military equipment. The asteroid field presented too many hazards for their sleek interceptors. Damage report, he requested, already plotting their next move. Port stabilizer is failing, Talon responded. Life support stable, fuel reserves at 62%, communications operational but limited to short range without revealing our position. It was enough, barely, to reach their rendezvous point if they proceeded carefully. Jacob adjusted their course, using minimal thruster burns to navigate between the asteroids. What about the others? Mike asked, his voice heavy with the weight of those left behind. Jacob had no comforting answer. If they're still alive, the Republic will keep them that way until they've extracted every bit of useful information. After that, he left the sentence unfinished. They all knew the possibilities: labor camps, rehabilitation, or summary execution if deemed security risks. "We'll come back for them," he promised, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Against the Republic's might, 7 fugitives and a damaged shuttle had few options. "The rendezvous coordinates," Kevin asked. "Who are we meeting?" Jacob's expression remained carefully neutral. "People who have reason to fear the Republic's control of that much Nippium heavy." As the shuttle limped through the asteroid field, Jacob's thoughts turned to his brother. Samuel would be coordinating the search, methodically eliminating possible escape routes, anticipating Jacob's strategies based on their shared history. But Samuel didn't know everything. He didn't know about the hidden samples of Nippium heavy secured in a location only Jacob could access. He didn't know about the alliances Jacob had quietly built during his years in exile. And most importantly, he didn't know that Jacob had been planning this moment since their paths diverged 15 years ago. Not the discovery itself, but the inevitable confrontation with the Republic it would trigger. The Nippium deposit was never going to make them rich. Jacob had known that from the beginning. But it might, if they were very lucky and very careful, give them something far more valuable: leverage against a system that had stolen everything else from them. 6 hours to rendezvous, he announced, setting the autopilot for a minimal power drift through the asteroid field. "Get some rest. We'll need clear heads for what comes next." As his crew settled into uneasy silence, Jacob stared out at the stars beyond the asteroid field. Somewhere out there, the Republic's grip was not absolute. Somewhere, resistance still flickered like the distant stars themselves, small points of light in overwhelming darkness. For the first time in years, those lights seemed close enough to reach. 6 months had transformed the KX-7 belt from a forgotten corner of space into a fortress of the People's Republic. The asteroid containing the Nippium heavy deposit was now encased in a massive mining complex. Kilometers of reinforced tunnels, processing facilities, and defense installations jutting from its surface like metallic tumors. Patrol vessels constantly swept the surrounding space, and automated defense platforms formed a deadly web around the operation. From the observation deck of the command center, Overseer Samuel Freshman surveyed his domain with cold satisfaction. The promotion had come swiftly after securing the deposit, elevating him 2 ranks above his previous station, a testament to the resource's value to the Republic. His new quarters were spacious by Republic standards, his authority nearly absolute within his jurisdiction, yet sleep eluded him most nights. The face of the young miner executed in the mess hall haunted his dreams, as did the knowledge that his brother had slipped through his grasp. Both represented failures that the Republic did not easily forgive, regardless of his other accomplishments. "Production report, Overseer," announced Technical Director Wilson, formerly of the Republic Science Academy. The man had been assigned to the operation for his expertise in Nippium processing, though his nervous mannerisms suggested previous adjustments by the Behavioral Compliance Division. Samuel accepted the datapad without comment, scanning the figures with practiced efficiency. "Extraction rates are 15% below projections," he noted, his tone making the observation an accusation. Wilson's posture stiffened imperceptibly. "The deposit's composition has proven more variable than initial surveys indicated. Some areas contain crystalline formations that damage standard extraction equipment." "Unacceptable," Samuel replied flatly. "The Central Committee expects full production within 2 weeks. The naval shipyards are waiting for the refined material to begin construction on the new Dreadnought class. Sir, with respect, the equipment modifications require time, and time is a luxury dictated by necessity, Director Wilson. Increased conscript labor in the difficult sections, manual extraction is less efficient but requires no retooling." Wilson hesitated. "The radiation levels in those sections exceed safety protocols for unshielded workers. Mortality rates would be acceptable given the strategic importance of the material," Samuel finished for him. I've already received authorization from the Ministry of Labor. An additional 500 conscripts will arrive tomorrow." The director nodded stiffly. Both men understood the mathematics of Republic resource extraction. Equipment was valuable and difficult to replace. Conscript labor was abundant and disposable. After Wilson departed, Samuel returned his attention to the external monitors. Somewhere beyond their range, his brother was planning something. Jacob had always been predictable in his unpredictability, a contradiction that had made him both an effective officer and an inevitable defector. He would not abandon his captured crew members, nor would he accept the Republic's control of a resource with such destructive potential. Samuel's security teams had interrogated the captured miners extensively, extracting technical information about the station and the deposit, but yielding frustratingly little about Jacob's contingency plans or contacts. Most had been transferred to labor assignments after their usefulness ended. Two, the communications specialist Mark and the engineer Brian, remained in detention for extended processing, their expertise still occasionally valuable when technical issues arose. An alert chimed on Samuel's console. "Overseer, long-range sensors have detected anomalous radiation signatures in Sector 14G, reported the security officer on duty, consistent with unshielded drive emissions. Samuel's expression didn't change, but his pulse quickened slightly. Sector 14G bordered the lawless region known unofficially as the Saturn Rings, a haven for smugglers, defectors, and others who existed in the shadows between Republic control and the truly free territories. "Duration of signature?" he inquired. 3 more than 6 seconds, sir. Insufficient for locational triangulation." "Deliberate, then." A brief engine burst, just long enough to be detected but too short to be tracked. A message rather than a mistake. "Increase patrol frequency in adjacent sectors," Samuel ordered. "Alert the destroyer People's Justice to adjust course to intercept position." "Sir," the officer hesitated. "The destroyer is currently escorting the conscript transport. Diverting would delay the arrival of the new workers." Samuel considered this. "Maintain the destroyer's current assignment. Deploy scout vessels instead. I want radiation sniffers in that sector within the hour." The message was clear enough without interception. Jacob was signaling his presence, announcing that whatever came next had begun. It was a typical Jacob Reynolds tactic, psychological warfare preceding actual engagement. Samuel returned to his private office where he activated the secure communication terminal. His report to Central Command would need to balance appropriate concern with confidence in his security measures. The Republic rewarded vigilance but punished alarmism. As he composed his message, Samuel's eyes drifted to the small holographic projection on his desk, the only personal item he allowed himself. It showed 2 young men in Republic military uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, faces bearing the identical features of twins, separated by only 2 years. The image was nearly 20 years old, captured before the Centauri incident, before Jacob's defection, before Samuel had chosen advancement over family loyalty. He deactivated the hologram with a sharp gesture. Sentiment was inefficiency, and inefficiency was failure in the eyes of the Republic. In the dimly lit command center of the smuggling vessel Broken Chain, Jacob Reynolds studied the tactical display with obsessive attention. The ship, a modified cargo hauler with reinforced hulls and upgraded engines, drifted in the shadow of a dead comet, its systems running at minimal power to avoid detection. "Scout vessels deploying from the mining complex," reported Kevin, who had adapted his mining sensor expertise to military applications over the past months. "Pattern suggests they detected our pulse." Jacob nodded, satisfied. "Good. Samuel will be expecting us to follow up with something more substantial. His resources will be committed to defensive posture for at least the next 12 hours. The command center around him bore little resemblance to their former mining station. Military-grade equipment, some stolen, some purchased through black market channels, some contributed by their new allies, filled the space. The 7 escapees from Last Chance had become the core of something larger, something that even Jacob had not fully anticipated when they fled 6 months earlier. "Transport convoy approaching checkpoint Delta," Ryan announced from the communications station. "Republic IFF transponders match expected signatures. Transponder cloning is ready for deployment." "Time to intercept?" Jacob asked. 4 hours at current velocity." Jacob turned to face the others gathered in the command center. His original crew had been supplemented by 24 others, defectors, smugglers, and political refugees united by their hatred of the Republic and their need for the protection that Jacob's growing organization provided. "The operation proceeds as planned," he announced. "Primary team will consist of myself, Greg, Kevin, Mike, and Talon. Doug will command the secondary team aboard the Swift Vengeance. Support vessels will maintain position at the outer marker unless emergency extraction is required." The plan had been rehearsed repeatedly over the past month, but Jacob believed in redundancy. In the vacuum of space, the smallest error meant death. "Our objective remains unchanged. We infiltrate the conscript transport, secure as many of the prisoners as our life support can handle, and extract before Republic forces can respond. We will prioritize technical personnel and political prisoners who can strengthen our coalition." What he didn't say, what didn't need saying, was that they would also search for their missing crew members. Every raid carried this secondary objective, though 6 months of intelligence gathering had yielded no confirmation that Mark or Brian remained alive. "What about the Nippium samples?" asked Steve, who had become Jacob's de facto second-in-command. Jacob's expression hardened slightly. "They remain our insurance policy, to be leveraged only when absolutely necessary. The samples, securely stored in a location known only to Jacob, represented their greatest asset and most dangerous liability. The mere rumor of their existence had been enough to attract allies from systems that normally avoided Republic entanglements. But possession of weapons-grade Nippium Heavy would make them priority targets for every Republic battle group in the sector. As the briefing concluded, the crew dispersed to their assignments. Only Mike remained behind, his weathered face more deeply lined than ever. At 63, he was the oldest member of their group, but his decades of experience in the belt made him invaluable. "You're worried about something specific?" Jacob observed. Not a question. Mike nodded slowly. "The pattern doesn't feel right. 6 transports in the past month, all following the same route, same escort configuration. Republic tactical doctrine emphasizes variation." "Samuel's resources are stretched thin," Jacob reasoned. "The committee is demanding results, which means prioritizing production over security." "Maybe," Mike conceded. "Or maybe he's establishing a pattern deliberately, waiting for us to become predictable in our responses." Jacob considered this. His brother had always been the more methodical of the two, preferring careful preparation to Jacob's improvisational approach. "What would you suggest?" "Change the timing. They'll be expecting us to hit the transport at checkpoint Delta, where the escort vessels rotate positions. Strike earlier, during the initial approach, when they believe they're still in secure space. A more dangerous approach, but also less predictable." Jacob nodded slowly. "Adjust the intercept calculations. We'll hit them at checkpoint Alpha instead." As Mike left to implement the change, Jacob returned his attention to the tactical display. Their small rebellion had achieved modest successes over the past months, intercepting supply vessels, disrupting communication relays, and most importantly, freeing nearly 300 conscript laborers from Republic transports. Each action strengthened their numbers while demonstrating that the Republic's control was not absolute. But Jacob harbored no illusions about their long-term prospects. The Republic possessed overwhelming military superiority. Their rebellion survived on mobility and surprise, advantages that would eventually be overcome by sufficient force. Their true victory, if it came, would not be military but informational. With each raid, they transmitted footage of Republic atrocities to neighboring systems, the reality behind the propaganda. The conscripts they rescued carried stories of the conditions at the mining complex, where workers were exposed to lethal radiation levels without protection, where dissent was met with immediate execution. These truths, more than any tactical success, represented their real weapon against the Republic. 4 hours later, the broken chain drifted silently on an intercept course with the Republic transport convoy. The ship's modified hull, coated with sensor-absorbing materials salvaged from an abandoned military outpost, rendered it nearly invisible to standard detection systems at this distance. Jakob stood in the airlock chamber with his assault team, performing final checks on their environment suits. The suits themselves were a patchwork of Republic military gear and civilian modifications, mismatched but functional, like the rebellion itself. "Transport approaching sensor range," Kevin's voice announced through the comm system. "Escort vessels in standard formation. No indication they've detected us." Jacob nodded to his team. "Remember, we have 7 minutes from attachment to extraction. Synchronize timers on my mark." He activated his suit's chronometer. "Mark?" The assault team consisted of 5 members, each selected for specific skills. Greg and Kevin would handle security systems and prisoner extraction. Mike would coordinate with the engineering crew on the Swift Vengeance to ensure their escape route remained clear. Talon would access the transport's data systems, searching for information about the mining operation and missing crew members. Jacob would oversee the operation and handle any unexpected complications, a role he had perfected during his military career. Initiating final approach, Ryan reported from the bridge. "Transponder cloning active, confirmed. Republic systems identify us as maintenance vessel, collective efficiency authorized for transport inspection." The broken chain accelerated smoothly toward the massive transport vessel, which dwarfed their ship in size if not maneuverability. The transport, designed to move up to 1,000 conscript laborers between assignments, was essentially a mobile prison with minimal life support and maximum security. "Escort vessels are querying our approach vector," Ryan warned. "Automated response protocols engaged, 50 seconds to attachment." Jacob felt the familiar tension before engagement, a focused clarity that narrowed his perception to the immediate tactical situation. "Weapons check," he ordered, and received 4 confirmations as his team verified their pulse rifles and neural disruptors. The broken chain executed a perfect approach, matching velocity with the transport's upper hull. Magnetic clamps engaged with a dull thud that resonated through the ship's frame. "Attachment confirmed," Ryan reported. "Escort vessels have accepted our maintenance protocols. Cutting torch is active." Jacob visualized the scene on the transport's hull, the specialized cutting tool slicing through the outer plating near an access hatch, bypassing security systems by creating an entry point where none should exist. The Republic's overconfidence in their secure space would cost them today. "Breach complete," Ryan announced after 30 seconds of tense silence. "Atmospheric seal established. You have access." Jacob led his team through the airlock and into the narrow access tube that now connected their ship to the transport. The tube of flexible, reinforced passage that would allow rapid evacuation if needed terminated at the ragged hole cut in the transport's hull. They emerged into a maintenance corridor, exactly as their intelligence had indicated. The corridor was dimly lit and unoccupied. Secondary systems received minimal attention in Republic vessel design, where efficiency was prioritized over redundancy. "Life signs?" Jacob queried through his helmet comm. Kevin consulted the scanner attached to his wrist, detecting approximately 850 humanoid signatures in the central hold, 12 security personnel on the command deck, 26 crew members distributed throughout the vessel. Better odds than they had anticipated. The Republic was indeed stretching its resources thin, operating this transport with minimal security. "Proceed to Junction C7, Jacob ordered. "Talon, access the nearest terminal and locate the prisoner manifest." They moved swiftly through the corridors, encountering no resistance. At Junction C7, Talon connected his specialized interface device to a maintenance terminal, bypassing security protocols with practiced efficiency. "Accessing prisoner database," he reported, fingers flying across the portable keypad. Manifest shows 847 conscripts designated for resource extraction duty, primarily political dissidents from the Arcturus colonies and technical specialists reassigned from various Republic facilities. Jacob's pulse quickened. Any familiar designations? Talon continued scanning, processing, wait. Prisoners 7, 7, 2, 4, 9, Brown, Mark, former communications specialist, current status, priority technical asset. His voice took on an edge of excitement. Prisoners 77250, Thomas, Brian, former engineering specialist, same status designation. After months of uncertainty, confirmation at last. Location? Jacob demanded. Secure holding level 3, section J, separate from general population. Jacob made a swift decision. Change of plan. Greg, Kevin, proceed with primary objective. Extract as many conscripts as our life support can handle. Talon, Mike, you're with me. We're getting our people back. The team split at the next junction, moving with the coordinated precision born of months of shared operations. Jacob led his smaller team toward the secure holding area, their path taking them deeper into the transport's restricted sections. 4 minutes remaining, Mike reminded them, checking his chronometer. They encountered their first resistance at a security checkpoint outside Level 3, 2 Republic guards in standard armor armed with RX-70 pulse rifles. The guards had only a moment to register surprise at the unauthorized personnel before Talon deployed a neural disruptor, dropping them without a sound. Armor configuration standard Republic issue, Mike observed, quickly examining the unconscious guards. No specialized equipment or emergency protocols visible, another sign of the Republic's stretched resources. Samuel would never have approved such minimal security for a transport carrying valuable technical assets, unless he was indeed setting a trap. Jacob pushed the thought aside. Trap or not, they would not leave their people behind. Section J proved to be a small detention block containing 6 cells, only 2 of which were occupied. Through the observation panels, Jacob could see Mark and Brian, thinner and more haggard than he remembered, but unmistakably alive. Talon connected his interface to the door control panel. Security protocols are higher grade here, multiple encryption layers. His brow furrowed in concentration. This could take longer than our window allows. Override it, Jacob ordered, removing a compact device from his equipment pouch. The thermal detonator, another piece of salvaged military technology, would breach the door instantly, at the cost of alerting security systems throughout the vessel. Mike nodded grimly. I'll adjust our extraction route accordingly. Jacob placed the device on the door seam, set the minimal yield configuration, and signaled his team to take cover around the corridor bend. The detonation was subdued, more of a sharp crack than an explosion, but effective. The door panel slid halfway open, jammed in its damaged track. Jacob forced the opening wider and entered the cell where Mark sat frozen in surprise on his narrow bunk. Recognition dawned slowly on the communications specialist's gaunt face. "Captain?" he whispered, using Jacob's former military title rather than his mining station designation. "You're real this time?" Jacob's throat tightened at the implication of previous hallucinations or Republic psychological manipulation. "I'm real, Mark. We're getting you out of here." Talon had already retrieved Brian from the adjacent cell. The engineer appeared dazed but functional, responding to basic commands without speaking. "They've been drugged," Talon assessed, checking Brian's pupils. "Compliance cocktail, standard Republic interrogation protocol, should wear off within hours." "Can they move under their own power?" Jacob asked. Mark stood shakily. "I can manage." Brian's had a higher dosage. They questioned him again this morning about the Nippium extraction techniques. Jacob helped support Brian while Mike took point position, leading them back toward their extraction route. They had lost valuable minutes with the detour, and the thermal detonator would have triggered security alerts throughout the ship. 2 minutes to extraction deadline, Mike warned as they navigated the corridors. Primary team reports they've secured 63 conscripts for transfer. Less than they had hoped, but a significant achievement nonetheless. Jacob increased their pace, half carrying Brian as the engineer struggled to coordinate his movements. An alarm began to sound, the shrill, pulsing tone of a security breach alert, rather than the general quarters signal that would indicate their presence had been fully discovered. They still had a narrow window of opportunity. "Approaching Junction D4, Mike reported, detecting multiple security personnel converging on our position from adjacent corridors." Jacob made a tactical assessment. Alternate route through maintenance shaft E7. The narrow shaft, barely large enough for a single person to traverse, would slow their progress but avoid the security response. They reached the access panel just as the sound of armored footsteps echoed from the main corridor. Mike wrenched the panel open and helped Mark inside. Talon followed with Brian while Jacob covered their position, pulse rifle ready. A Republic security officer rounded the corner, spotted Jacob, and raised his weapon. Jacob fired first, a single precise shot that struck the man's shoulder joint where the armor plates connected. The officer fell with a cry of pain. Jacob ducked into the maintenance shaft, pulling the access panel closed behind him. The shaft was claustrophobic and dimly lit by emergency lighting strips, forcing them to crawl in single file toward the extraction point. 30 seconds remaining, Mike's voice came from ahead. The Swift Vengeance reports Republic vessels breaking formation to investigate the security alert. Their window was closing rapidly. Jacob urged them forward with greater urgency, aware that Brian's drug condition was slowing their progress significantly. They emerged from the maintenance shaft into the corridor leading to their breach point, finding Greg waiting anxiously. "Transport is complete," he reported. "Kevin is securing the conscripts aboard the Swift Vengeance. Broken Chain is standing by for immediate departure." "Go," Jacob ordered. "Get them aboard. I'll cover." As his team moved the rescued prisoners toward the breach point, Jacob heard the unmistakable sound of a security detail approaching, the rhythmic tread of armored boots and the metallic click of weapons being readied. He positioned himself at the corridor junction, pulse rifle braced against his shoulder. When the first Republic officer appeared, Jacob fired a sustained burst, forcing them back into cover. He wasn't trying to kill, only to delay, to buy precious seconds for his team's extraction. "All personnel aboard except you, Captain," Mike reported through the comm. 15 seconds until escort vessels will have firing solutions on our position." Jacob fired one final covering burst, then sprinted for the breach point. The access tube felt miles long as he ran, pulse blasts from Republic weapons striking the walls around him. He dove through the opening just as Ryan initiated emergency separation procedures. The flexible tube detached from the transport's hull, whipping violently in the vacuum as the broken chain pulled away. Jacob felt the ship's engines engage at maximum thrust, pushing him against the deck plating with the force of rapid acceleration. "Republic vessels in pursuit," Ryan reported from the bridge. "Targeting systems active but not yet locked." Jacob knew they had only moments before the escort vessels would open fire. "Execute jump sequence Alpha." The broken chain had been modified with military-grade emergency thrusters, salvaged from a decommissioned Republic patrol craft, and installed specifically for situations requiring rapid escape. The thrusters ignited with a force that threatened to overwhelm the ship's inertial compensators, hurling them away from the transport at speeds that would normally tear a civilian vessel apart. "Republic vessels unable to match acceleration," Kevin reported with grim satisfaction. "Targeting systems unable to establish lock." Jacob allowed himself a moment of relief as he made his way to the bridge. The Swift Vengeance would be executing its own escape vector, carrying the rescued conscripts to the hidden base they had established in the Saturn rings. Both ships would take circuitous routes to avoid leading Republic forces to their sanctuary. On the bridge, he found Mark already at the communication station, his professional instincts overriding his weakened condition. "They're broadcasting pursuit alerts on all Republic frequencies," Mark reported, his voice strained but focused. "Standard protocol. No indication they've identified us specifically." Another small victory. Their identities, and more importantly their capabilities, remained obscured. As the broken chain reached safe distance, Jacob studied the tactical display showing the transport and its escorts growing steadily smaller. The operation had succeeded on multiple levels. They had rescued more conscripts, recovered their missing crew members, and demonstrated once again that the Republic's control was not absolute. But the real work was just beginning. 1 month later, the mining complex in the KX-7 belt had been transformed into a fortress under siege. Despite the complex's formidable defenses, the series of attacks following the transport raid had forced Samuel to implement increasingly desperate security measures. Critical supply shipments had been intercepted. Communication relays had been damaged or destroyed. 3 separate conscript transports had been raided, with hundreds of workers liberated. Most damaging of all, detailed accounts of the conditions within the mining operation, including footage of workers exposed to lethal radiation levels, had been transmitted throughout neighboring systems. Samuel stood in his office, facing the stern visage of Sector Commander Hayes on his communication screen. The commander's expression promised consequences beyond mere demotion. "The committee is most displeased with these developments, Overseer Freshman," Hayes stated without preamble. "Production quotas are now 60% below projections. Security incidents have increased by 400%. The propaganda damage is significant." Samuel maintained a rigidly professional demeanor despite the implicit threat. "The situation is challenging but manageable, Commander. I have implemented new security protocols and requested additional military assets to—" "Your requests have been denied," Hayes interrupted. "The Republic cannot afford to divert additional resources to secure a single mining operation, regardless of its strategic value. You will restore order with what you have." The implication was clear: success or execution. The Republic did not tolerate failure, particularly from those it had elevated to positions of authority. "There is another approach we might consider," Samuel suggested carefully. "Intelligence indicates the insurgents are being led by Jacob Reynolds, the former station manager. His tactical approach suggests military training and intimate knowledge of our protocols." Hayes's expression remained impassive. "Your brother, according to your file, the committee has noted this connection." A subtle reminder that Samuel's own loyalty remained under scrutiny. "Yes, Commander. This connection provides an opportunity. Reynolds appears to be motivated partly by personal loyalty to his former crew. I propose using the remaining prisoners as bait for a focused operation." "Explain." Samuel outlined his plan. A calculated risk that would commit significant resources to a single decisive engagement rather than dispersing them in defensive positions. Hayes listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing until Samuel concluded. "The committee authorizes this operation," he finally said. "But understand, Overseer Freshman, that failure will have only one outcome for everyone involved." The screen went dark, leaving Samuel alone with the weight of the implicit death sentence. He had gambled his life and those of everyone under his command on his ability to predict his brother's actions. He activated the internal communication system. "Security Chief Taylor, begin preparations for Operation Final Authority. Full details will follow through secure channels." The time for half measures had passed. This confrontation with his brother would end decisively one way or another. In the command center of the hidden base deep within the Saturn rings, Jacob studied the message that had been intercepted from Republic communications channels. The base itself, constructed within a hollowed-out asteroid, had grown from a simple hideout into a functioning operations center for what was now being called the Free Miners Alliance in Republic propaganda. "It's clearly a trap," Steve observed, watching Jacob's expression. "The transfer order for Mark and Brian is too convenient, too easily intercepted." Jacob nodded slowly. "Of course it's a trap. The question is why Samuel wants us to know it's a trap. The intercepted order detailed the scheduled transfer of high-value technical assets from the mining complex to a Republic research facility, with specific mention of prisoners 7724-9B and 77250B. Mark and Brian's designation numbers from the transport. The transfer vessel would follow a course that took it through a region of space where previous Alliance raids had been successful. Mark, who had recovered his strength if not his former weight, frowned at the tactical display. The escort configuration is unusual, minimal for such valuable assets. Because they want us to attack, Mike said. They're counting on our predictability. Jacob agreed with the assessment. Samuel knows we won't abandon our people, even knowing it's a trap. He's using our loyalty against us. He smiled thinly. Just as I would in his position. The brothers had always understood each other too well, their shared upbringing and military training creating a kind of tactical symmetry that made their conflict as much a chess match as a rebellion. So, we don't attack the transport, Ryan suggested. We find another way to rescue them. Jacob shook his head. There is no rescue. Mark and Brian are already here with us. These are decoys, Republic loyalists given their identities for this operation. The realization dawned on the others. Samuel wasn't trying to recapture escaped prisoners. He was attempting to eliminate the Alliance leadership in a single operation. What will you do? Talon asked quietly. Jacob's expression hardened with resolution. Exactly what he expects, but not in the way he expects it. Over the next 3 days, Jacob outlined his counterplan to the Alliance leadership. It was audacious, high-risk, and entirely characteristic of his approach to warfare, elements that made it both predictable to Samuel in concept but unpredictable in execution. We will attack the transport, he explained, but not to rescue prisoners who don't exist. Our target is the mining complex itself. The strategy was elegant in its deception. While Samuel committed resources to the trap around the transport, the Alliance would launch its most ambitious operation yet, a direct assault on the heart of the Republic's Nippium operation. Our objective is not to capture the complex, Jacob continued, addressing the concern visible on many faces. That would be suicide against Republic reinforcements. Our goal is to deny them the resource by collapsing the primary extraction tunnels. Kevin, who had been studying the complex's structural data extracted from Republic systems during their various operations, highlighted a series of points on the three-dimensional display. These 6 junctions are critical to the stability of the entire tunnel network, he explained. Targeted demolition charges at these points would cause a cascade collapse that would make extraction impossible for months, possibly years. The plan required precision timing, expert placement of explosives, and a diversionary attack substantial enough to draw security forces away from the critical junctions. Most importantly, it required volunteers willing to infiltrate the complex itself. A mission with minimal chances of survival. To Jacob's surprise, there was no shortage of volunteers. The Alliance had grown to include hundreds of former conscripts who had experienced the brutality of Republic extraction operations firsthand. For them, striking back at the system that had enslaved them was worth any risk. The operation was scheduled to coincide with the transfer of the false prisoners, when Samuel's attention and resources would be divided between the trap he had set and the complex's routine security. On the night before the operation, Jacob found himself unable to sleep. He stood in the small observation dome atop the hidden base, gazing at the distant stars through the reinforced transparent material. Among those points of light lay Earth, the ancestral home they had been taught to revere in Republic education, though few citizens would ever see it. The committee maintained that Earth was a paradise reserved for those who had proven their loyalty through extraordinary service. Jacob had never believed the propaganda. His parents had passed down older truths before their disappearance, stories of an Earth ravaged by the same exploitation that the Republic now imposed on its colonies. Stories of resistance movements that had eventually forced change through sacrifice and persistence. Thinking about tomorrow, Mike's voice came from behind him. The old miner joined him at the viewport, his weathered face reflective in the starlight. Thinking about Samuel, Jacob admitted. And what turned brothers into enemies? Mike nodded slowly. The Republic specializes in that transformation, turning natural bonds into weapons. He paused. What will you do if you face him directly? Jacob had asked himself the same question countless times over the past months. I don't know, he answered honestly. Part of me still sees the brother who stood with me against the neighborhood bullies. Another part sees only the Republic officer who ordered a man shot for quoting labor regulations. Both exist in the same person, Mike observed, just as the seeds of rebellion existed in you long before you acted on them. The insight struck Jacob as profoundly true. Samuel wasn't a monster, he was a man who had made different choices when faced with the Republic's immorality. Choices that had led him deeper into complicity rather than toward resistance. Get some rest, Mike advised, turning to leave. Talonoro will demand everything from all of us. Jacob remained a while longer, watching the stars and contemplating the nature of loyalty. To family, to principles, to power. Talonoro would indeed demand everything, possibly including the final choice regarding his brother. The Alliance attack began precisely as the falsified prisoner transport departed the mining complex. 3 modified cargo vessels, appearing on Republic scanners as routine supply ships, approached from different vectors, their holds filled not with goods, but with fighters and explosives. From the command deck of the lead vessel, designated Freedom's Price, Jacob coordinated the operation with the calm precision that had made him an effective officer before his defection. Beside him, Ryan managed communications while Kevin monitored the tactical display showing Republic forces beginning to react to their approach. Republic defense platforms activating, Kevin reported. Targeting systems coming online. Jacob had anticipated this. Deploy countermeasures. Begin transmission of false identification codes. The Alliance technical team, strengthened by the addition of Mark's communications expertise, had developed sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities over the past months. Their systems flooded Republic channels with contradictory identification signals, creating confusion in automated defense protocols designed to prioritize threats. Infiltration team standing by, Ryan announced. Diversionary forces in position. Jacob gave the command that would commit them fully to the operation. Execute primary assault. The Freedom's Price accelerated toward the mining complex, accompanied by 2 smaller attack craft that had been concealed within its modified hull. As Republic defense systems targeted the larger vessel, the attack craft broke formation to strike at secondary installations scattered across the asteroid's surface. Meanwhile, the 2 other cargo vessels deployed their own forces, a combination of salvaged mining drones repurposed as guided explosives and small assault teams in heavily shielded insertion pods. The pods, designed to survive both defensive fire and impact with the asteroid's surface, would deliver the demolition teams to their designated entry points. Republic vessels responding, Kevin reported as the tactical display showed defender ships moving to intercept. Primary response force diverting from scheduled rendezvous with the transport, secondary response elements deploying from the complex. The diversion was working. Samuel would recognize the threat to the mining operation as greater than the opportunity to spring his trap. What he couldn't know was that the visible attack was itself a diversion for the real operation, the infiltration teams targeting the critical tunnel junctions. Insertion pods away, Ryan confirmed as the specialized craft separated from their carrier vessels. Tracking 12 successful launches. Impact in 45 seconds. Jacob watched the tactical display with focused intensity. Each pod contained a 3-person team equipped with demolition charges, breaching equipment, and minimal survival gear. Their mission was simple but nearly suicidal. Penetrate the complex, reach their assigned junction, plant the charges, and extract if possible. The pods struck the asteroid's surface like metallic meteors, burying themselves in the regolith near maintenance airlocks and emergency exits identified in stolen schematics. Republic defense systems scored several hits during the approach, but 9 of the 12 pods reached their targets intact, enough to proceed with the operation. First teams reporting successful breaches, Ryan announced, monitoring the encrypted communication channel. Proceeding to primary objectives, outside the space around the mining complex had erupted into chaotic battle. The Alliance attack craft weaved through defensive fire, striking at communication arrays and sensor installations to further degrade the Republic's coordination. The Freedom's price absorbed punishment from multiple defense platforms, its reinforced hull holding despite the battering. Republic battlecruiser collective will changing course to intercept, Kevin warned. Estimated engagement in 12 minutes. The battlecruiser, Samuel's command vessel, had been positioned near the false prisoner transport as part of the trap. Its return to the complex confirmed that Samuel had recognized the greater threat. Maintain current operations, Jacob ordered. The demolition teams need 10 minutes to reach their positions. Those 10 minutes stretched into an eternity of tactical adjustments and damage reports. The Freedom's price shuddered repeatedly as Republic weapons found their mark. One of the support vessels reported critical damage and was forced to withdraw. 3 of the infiltration teams went silent, their fate unknown but presumed lost. Remaining teams report reaching primary junctions, Ryan finally announced. Setting charges now. Jack allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. Even if the Alliance forces were completely destroyed in the next few minutes, the operation would succeed in its primary objective. The Republic's prized Nippium heavy deposit would soon be inaccessible. Republic battlecruiser entering weapons range, Kevin warned. Energy signature indicates main batteries powering up. Evasive pattern Delta, Jack ordered. Prepare emergency jump coordinates. The Freedom's price lurched violently as its engines strained to execute the complex maneuver. On the tactical display, the massive form of the collective will dominated the battlefield, its weapons systems capable of obliterating the smaller Alliance vessels with a single concentrated barrage. Incoming transmission, Ryan reported with surprise, from the battlecruiser priority channel. Jack knew who it would be. Put it through. The tactical display flickered, replaced by the image of Samuel Voss. His brother's face showed the strain of command, but remained composed with the disciplined control that had always characterized him. Jack, Samuel acknowledged simply. I underestimated your audacity, if not your motivation. You were expecting us to chase shadows while you secured the real prize, Jack replied, matching his brother's professional tone despite the chaos of battle around them. I learned that tactic from you, if you recall. A flicker of something, recognition, perhaps even pride, crossed Samuel's features before the Republic commander reasserted control. Your attack is impressive but futile. Even if you damage the complex, the Republic will rebuild. Your rebellion is a footnote in history, not a chapter. We're not trying to write history, Samuel. We're trying to change it. Charges set at all 6 junctions, Ryan interrupted urgently. Detonation in 3 minutes. Extraction teams reporting heavy resistance. Samuel heard this, his expression hardening. You're willing to sacrifice your own people for this gesture. That's not the brother I knew. They volunteered, Jack responded, the weight of command heavy in his voice. Unlike the conscripts, your Republic works to death in radiation-soaked tunnels. What happened to you, Samuel? When did you become comfortable with atrocity? For a moment, something vulnerable showed through the commander's mask, a glimpse of the boy who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with his brother against schoolyard bullies and neighborhood thugs. I believed in order, Samuel said quietly. Instability, the alternative seemed worse. And now? After seeing what that order costs? Samuel didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, the main batteries are locked on your position. Your vessel cannot survive the barrage. I know, Jack acknowledged. But the charges will still detonate, the tunnels will still collapse, and the footage will still transmit. Footage? Jack allowed himself a grim smile. Every infiltration team carried recording devices. Every atrocity, every labor camp, every radiation-poisoned worker without protection, all broadcasting now to every system within range. Your Republic is exposed, Samuel, not just to us rebels, but to ordinary citizens who still believe the propaganda. The tactical display showed multiple communication beams emanating from the mining complex, the infiltration team's final act before the charges detonated. The truth weapon more powerful than any explosive. Samuel's expression changed subtly as reports doubtless reached him confirming Jack's claim. The Republic built its control on information management as much as military might. This breach in their narrative was potentially more damaging than any physical attack. 2 minutes to detonation, Ryan reported. Extraction teams requesting emergency support. Jack faced an impossible choice. Attempt to rescue the infiltration teams at the cost of the entire operation, or withdraw to ensure the Alliance survived to continue the fight? Before he could decide, Samuel spoke again. Extraction Corridor Delta 7 is temporarily unmonitored, he said, his voice lowered as if concerned about being overheard. Security forces have been diverted to priority defense sectors. Jack stared at his brother in disbelief. You're helping us? Samuel's face returned to its professional mask. I'm making a tactical assessment regarding resource allocation, nothing more. A pause. 60 seconds until main batteries achieve optimal firing solution. I suggest you use them wisely. The transmission cut abruptly, leaving Jack with a decision that would define the rebellion's future. Transmit extraction coordinates to all teams, he ordered without hesitation. Route Delta 7, all vessels provide covering fire for withdrawal. The next moments passed in a blur of coordinated chaos. Alliance vessels executed precise maneuvers to draw Republic fire away from the extraction corridor Samuel had identified. 5 of the 6 remaining infiltration teams reported moving toward extraction points, fighting through diminished resistance as Republic security forces inexplicably redeployed to other sectors. 30 seconds to detonation, Kevin announced as the tactical display showed small transport craft emerging from the mining complex, the infiltration teams making their desperate escape. Begin withdrawal, Jack ordered. All vessels maximum thrust once teams are secured. The Freedom's Price shuddered under the strain as its engines pushed beyond safety parameters the extraction craft. Little more than reinforced life pods, docked with practiced urgency, disgorging teams of exhausted, wounded fighters who had accomplished the impossible. Final team reporting docking complete, Ryan confirmed. All surviving personnel accounted for. Execute emergency jump, Jack commanded. Now. The stars outside blurred as the Freedom's Price activated its modified jump drive. A dangerous maneuver this close to the asteroid's mass shadow, but their only chance of escaping the battlecruiser's weapons. As they made the jump, the final transmissions from the mining complex showed the detonation. Critical support structures collapsed in chain reactions, sending shockwaves through the entire tunnel network. The prized Nippium heavy deposit disappeared, beneath tons of rock and metal buried beyond reach. But Jack's thoughts weren't on the tactical victory. They were fixed on his brother's unexpected choice, not quite redemption perhaps, but a recognition of lines that even a Republic commander would not cross. 3 months later, Jack stood in the expanded command center of the Alliance's new base, watching as representatives from previously neutral systems discussed formal recognition of the rebellion. The mining operations' collapse had sent shockwaves beyond the physical damage, economic, political, and moral tremors that continued to undermine Republic authority. Most significant was the impact of the broadcast footage. Uncensored images of Republic atrocities had circulated throughout neighboring systems, igniting protests and defections that the committee struggled to contain. The narrative of benevolent collective order had cracked, revealing the brutality beneath. The Centauri Coalition is offering military support, Steve reported, joining Jack at the tactical display. Nothing official, but decommissioned vessels with experienced crews willing to join our cause. Jack nodded thoughtfully. And the Republic response? Contradictory. Public broadcasts claim the mining disaster was an industrial accident. Internal communications show the committee has executed 3 senior officials for failure, including Sector Commander Hayes. And Samuel? Jack asked, the question he had been avoiding for months. Steve's expression grew solemn. Removed from command immediately after the incident. Official status listed as reassigned to an unspecified position. The Republic euphemism could mean anything from actual reassignment to a labor camp sentence or execution. Jack had monitored all available channels for information about his brother's fate, but Samuel had simply disappeared from official records, as happened to many who fell from favor. Their last interaction remained a mystery that Jack couldn't fully unravel. Had Samuel deliberately created the extraction opportunity out of fraternal loyalty, or had it been a calculated decision to preserve some Republic assets rather than lose everything in the collapse? Perhaps both motivations had existed simultaneously in the complex calculus of loyalty and conscience. "We received another transmission from the Saturn outpost," Steve continued. 23 more defectors, including 3 Republic technical officers with access codes to military communication networks. The defections had accelerated as word of the Alliance's success spread. What had begun as a desperate act of survival by 12 miners had evolved into a movement that threatened Republic control in multiple sectors. Jack turned from the tactical display to the viewport overlooking the hangar bay, where vessels bearing the Alliance insignia, a miner's pickaxe crossed with a pulse rifle, prepared for operations. Among them was a newly arrived ship with Republic lines but civilian markings, reportedly carrying medical supplies from sympathizers in the inner systems. "Something about that vessel," Jack said quietly, a familiar sensation prickling at his tactical instincts. Steve followed his gaze. "Intelligence cleared it, transponder checks out, and we verified the medical supplies." Jack nodded but moved toward the control station. "Run a deep scan on the communication system. Look for military-grade encryption modules." The operator complied, her fingers moving rapidly across the console. "Detecting anomalous components in the primary communication array. Definitely not standard civilian configuration." Before Jack could respond, the vessel's comm system activated, broadcasting on a frequency that hadn't been used since Jack's military service. A special operations channel shared only with select officers. "Alliance Command, this is incoming vessel requesting secure communication with Jack Reynolds. Authentication code Sierra Victor 749. Jack froze, recognizing both the code and its significance. SV-749 was Samuel's personal authentication sequence from their shared military past. "Verify life signs aboard that vessel," he ordered, tension evident in his voice. "Scanning. 1 life sign, human male, appears to be in medical distress, elevated radiation signatures consistent with exposure treatment." Jack made his decision instantly. "Secure the hangar, medical team on standby, full decontamination protocols. I'll meet the vessel personally." Steve looked alarmed. "Captain, if this is a Republic trap..." "Then I'm the one who should face it," Jack finished. "But I don't think it is." The next 30 minutes passed with excruciating slowness as the vessel completed docking procedures under heavy security. Jack waited in the decontamination chamber adjacent to the hangar, pulse rifle ready despite his instincts telling him it wouldn't be needed. When the vessel's airlock finally opened, a single figure emerged, thinner and more haggard than Jack remembered, moving with the careful deliberation of someone managing significant pain, but unmistakably Samuel. Republic radiation burns marked the left side of his face, the distinctive pattern caused by exposure to Nippium particles without proper shielding. His uniform had been replaced with nondescript civilian clothing, but he carried himself with the same military bearing that had defined him since childhood. "Hello, Jack," Samuel said simply, stopping at a respectful distance. Jack kept his weapon lowered but ready. "Authentication phrase." A faint smile crossed Samuel's damaged features. "The sun still rises in the east." The old resistance code their father had taught them before his disappearance. Jack exhaled slowly, lowering his rifle completely. "What happened to you?" "Official version or reality?" Samuel asked, the bitterness in his tone revealing how completely his faith in the Republic had shattered. "Both. Officially, I was reassigned to oversee the salvage operation at the mining complex. Unofficially, I was being punished for failure by exposure to radiation levels that would ensure a painful, prolonged death." He gestured to his scarred face. "The committee doesn't waste bullets on high-ranking officers. It makes examples of them. And yet you're here, Samuel nodded slowly. When your teams broadcasted footage of conditions in the mining operation, they included images of conscripts working without radiation protection. The Republic claimed these were propaganda fabrications. I was sent to disprove them by working safely in the same conditions. The cruel irony was characteristic of Republic retribution, forcing the failed commander to disprove allegations by becoming subject to the same abuse. I managed to access a communication terminal during a medical treatment session, Samuel continued. Contacted some former colleagues who had already defected. They arranged extraction and transport. Jack studied his brother, seeing beyond the physical changes to something more fundamental, the broken faith of a man who had given everything to a system that had betrayed its own principles. "Why come here?" Jack asked, the real question hanging between them. "Why not flee to neutral territory?" Samuel met his gaze directly. "Because you were right. Because I watched men die from radiation poisoning while committee representatives calculated acceptable loss rates to maintain production quotas. Because I finally saw clearly what I had been serving." He paused. "And because you're still my brother." The medical team waited expectantly, monitoring Samuel's deteriorating vital signs from a distance. The radiation damage was severe, potentially terminal without advanced treatment. Jack made his decision, stepping forward to support his brother as Samuel's strength visibly faltered. "Get him to medical," he ordered the team. "Priority treatment. Full security protocols until cleared." As they helped Samuel onto a stretcher, he grasped Jack's arm with surprising strength. "I brought data," he said urgently. "Command codes, defense protocols, deployment schedules, everything I could access." Jack nodded. "We'll discuss it when you're stabilized." "There's more?" Samuel insisted, his voice weakening. "The committee is developing something new, weaponized Nippium. They call it Project Sunrise. I only saw fragments, but it's..." He coughed violently, blood speckling his lips. "It's worse than anything we imagined." The medical team moved quickly, rushing Samuel toward the treatment center. Jack remained in the decontamination chamber, processing the implications of his brother's defection and warning. The rebellion had just gained invaluable intelligence and a symbolic victory in turning one of the Republic's commanders. But the mention of Project Sunrise suggested their fight was entering a new, more dangerous phase. As Jack left the decontamination chamber, he gazed out at the assembled Alliance vessels. What had begun as a desperate escape by a handful of miners had evolved into something greater. A genuine challenge to Republic authority. The brothers who had once been divided by ideology were reunited by recognition of a shared truth. Freedom demanded sacrifice, but oppression demanded more. The People's Republic of Free Worlds still controlled vast territories and resources. The Alliance remained outmatched in conventional military terms. But as the liberated conscripts, defecting officers, and independent systems rallying to their cause demonstrated, control through fear created its own vulnerability. Each act of resistance inspired others. Each exposed lie weakened the foundation of power. Jack thought of the Nippium heavy deposit, now buried and inaccessible. The miners had lost their discovery but found something more valuable. A cause worth fighting for. A future worth building. The rebellion had begun with the question of who would control the means of production, but it had become a battle for who would control the narrative of human civilization itself. As reports of new defections and uprisings reached the command center, Jack allowed himself to contemplate a possibility that had once seemed unthinkable. The Republic might actually fall. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually, collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions and cruelty, just as the mining tunnels had collapsed when their support structures were removed. The war ahead would be long and brutal. Project Sunrise loomed as an unknown threat. But for the first time since the Nippium discovery, Jack felt something beyond determination or resolve. He felt hope. Genuine, rational hope that the sacrifices were not in vain, that the murdered miners and radiation-poisoned workers and all who had suffered under Republic tyranny might eventually be vindicated. "The sun still rises in the east," he murmured, his father's resistance code taking on new meaning as the Alliance prepared for the next phase of their rebellion. Beyond the viewport, stars burned in the endless night, distant suns rising on worlds yet to be freed. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave it a like and to subscribe if you'd like to see more. Feel free to comment and share it as well. With all that said, go on and check out the video in the top left. I think you might like it.